is U.S. History Regents Review for Unit 3. This is video number 5. We just finished talking about populism. This is a movement growing out west among farmers and eventually for some people who are common laborers in factories, fighting for their rights, for their economic well-being, and against the well-being, or I should say the interests of those who are elite, rich, wealthy, the people who own the means of production. And we're going to read a little piece from the Populist Party platform. A platform is a statement of beliefs and positions for this political party, explaining basically why they've come together and what they're fighting for. And I think it's a really important description for us to read to understand how the farmers were feeling, but also how a lot of other Americans were feeling. And farmers at this time are almost half the population. And people who aren't farming are working in factories, and they're feeling these really similar frustrations. And this will help us lead into talking about the labor movement. The conditions which surround us best justify our cooperation. So why are we working together? Why did we get together? We meet in the midst of a nation brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin. Corruption dominates the ballot box, the legislatures, the Congress, and touches even the bench. The people are demoralized. Most of the states have been compelled to isolate the voters at the polling places to prevent universal intimidation and bribery. The newspapers are largely subsidized or muzzled, public opinion silenced, business prostrated, homes covered with mortgages, labor impoverished, and the land concentrating in the hands of capitalists. So this person, the writers are describing that the country is in a point of crisis. They see corruption everywhere in government. They see no freedom of speech for themselves. And land is really under the control of the capitalists, the people who own everything, the rich. The urban, in the city, workmen are denied the right to organize for self-protection, meaning labor unions. Imported pauperized labor beats down their wages. That's a complaint against immigrants. The fruits of the toil of millions are boldly stolen to build up colossal fortunes for a few, unprecedented in the history of mankind, and the possessors of those, in turn, despise the republic and endanger liberty. From the same prolific womb of governmental injustice, we breed the two great classes, beggars and millionaires. So the key complaint is the idea that there is a huge wealth gap growing in the country. A few people have colossal fortunes, and they take away the liberty of the poor, or really most Americans. And they see this as a huge injustice. And this is the reason they are creating the Populist Party. Eventually, the Populist Party, while it will never, really elect any major candidates or president, it does become really important in politics in Western states. And a lot of these ideas are adopted by the Democrats. The Democrats end up taking in some of these ideas, and actually William Jennings Bryan, one of the big proponents of free silver, he becomes their presidential nominee. So let's switch to talking about industrialization. And again, my argument is that these things are all really connected. So why is this happening at the end of the 1800s? Well, Americans were tapping into a great wealth of natural resources in the country: iron ore, coal, timber, and oil. If you look at this map over here, you can see how the steel industry functions. You see areas that are dark orange here have a lot of coal. You can see different iron and steel works like Pittsburgh, Cleveland. You can see railroads, shipping routes. All this area is really industrializing, and it's related to the natural resources of the land. Timber is going to be used to build And a lot of what it's building is homes in Western areas, and other major factories. A lot of the timber actually comes from New York State, the Adirondack region, um, Michigan, Wisconsin. All these areas are used for their timber. And then oil. Eventually, oil is going to be refined. First, it's used for kerosene, which is a type of which they would use for lamps for lighting, lanterns. And then later, it's not until cars that it's really used for the gasoline to fuel cars. There's a great availability of cheap labor, and this is related to the massive immigration taking place at this time. Immigrants are coming and they are working, and they are working pretty cheaply. Urbanization is taking place. This is the growth of cities. Cities like New York City, Chicago, Detroit are becoming massive, millions. And the government has policies that really support the growth of these huge businesses. The Republican Party used high tariffs, which encourage American-made manufacturing. And otherwise, though, the government's been pretty laissez-faire, meaning the government has had its hands off of the economy. It's not doing very much regulation, which allows people to accumulate mass amounts of wealth, and sometimes that's at the expense of the workers and the environment. New inventions are being created. This is something we call entrepreneurship. People are encouraged to make their own businesses, to innovate, come up with new ideas. We have patent systems that protect people's new ideas. Things like the typewriter and the telephone and the light bulb are all created during this time. And railroads are spreading as well, and communication networks. So travel and trade and communication all expanding across the country. And there are ideas that support all of this. Social Darwinism. Darwin had his theory of evolution that talked about survival of the fittest. This is taking that idea and applying it to society. The strongest, best, and brightest will succeed. If one company can outdo another company and the little ma and pa shop down the street goes bankrupt, good. That's natural. Only the best should exist. And companies that can't compete and keep up should fail. And the idea also is that those who make it rich deserve being rich. They are smarter and better people. And maybe the poor should have just worked a little bit harder. There are new business structures being created. We'll talk about the growth of monopolies. And in general, you should take away there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor. This is where that nickname, the Gilded Age, comes from for this time period. Because while there are some people becoming incredibly wealthy, most people are not sharing that wealth and getting to enjoy its benefits as well. Although we will see the standards of living increase in general and the cost of living go down eventually because of industrialization. People's lives will improve overall, but it's a challenging process. So, the way that businesses are changing, the reason some people become so rich is because they form monopolies. A monopoly, the goal is to create all or to control all of a market by eliminating competition. And they eliminate competition through a variety of means. Some of them are what we'd call unscrupulous. They're kind of sneaky and backhanded. But they would argue, hey, it's all legit. I didn't break any rules. And trusts are the name we give for the way that companies can actually do that. They can work together and form a board of trustees and create a virtual monopoly over a market. So we often use monopoly and trust the same way. There's one method you can use called vertical integration. That's this left one, where you purchase all the companies for every level of production. So from start to end of a product, you control it all. Horizontal integration is buying up all of your competitors. So this is what Standard Oil does by buying up all oil refineries and creating one giant company.